Welcome to the Divine Style podcast, where the journey to self-love and spiritual awakening begins. I'm your host, Gerlinda Stella, a psychic medium, intuitive life coach, and guide on your path to self-discovery. Here we delve deep into the heart of what it means to truly know and love oneself. I am very excited today. I have a very special guest joining us. Kellie Kennett is a devoted practitioner and instructor of the realms of Kundalini yoga, meditation, sound healing, and breath work. She's a beloved guide for those seeking a path to greater self-awareness, self-love, peace, and fulfillment. Welcome, Kellie. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Gerlinda. That was a beautiful introduction.
I would really love to know, what is Kundalini?
Kundalini, the word comes from kundal, which means curl of the beloved. And so there is this concept of it being like this coil in the base of our spine, and that there is an activation that can occur that enables this coil to then move up through our being. In other different lineages of yoga, there is this talk of these energetic channels. So the Ida and the Pingala and the Sushmana. So the Sushmana is this central energetic channel, which the Kundalini lies at the base of. And the Ida and the Pingala coil up either side of that central channel, crossing at each of our chakra points and then meeting together at the top of it. So there is this link, and that's this kind of visual of these three channels is common in Ayurvedic teachings, in Chinese medicine teachings. Basically, anyone who has worked with the kind of energy systems has some similarity in this regard. So it is this sense of this energy moving up through us. Some even suggest that our vagus nerve, which is this the main nerve of our parasympathetic nervous system, which runs from our skull all the way down to the base of the spine and then branches off through all our major organs like a tree, that is what people were referring to as this Kundalini pathway, which I think is kind of interesting because we haven't had mainstream knowledge about the vagus nerve and the visual of the vagus nerve until fairly recently. So it's interesting when you get those kind of alignments between science and these ancient teachings.
What's the benefits of having Kundalini or doing Kundalini or this awakening of Kundalini?
It is considered our sacred divine energy, like our Shakti or our life force kind of energy. So if we consider that, and we think about what would it be like if my innate divine energy was running efficiently through my body, think things like vitality, radiant, open through our centers. So our heart is open, our intuition is switched on, our connection to the cosmos, to the earth, to those around us is strong and open.
Can you tell me a little bit about what it was that brought you into wanting to do this type of yoga?
I think it's a fairly common story with a lot of people who find their way to Kundalini yoga that it just kind of found me. So my actual first experience of it was a $2 DVD from Crazy Clark's that was titled Yoga for Weight Loss. It didn't even say Kundalini yoga on it. I didn't even know till years later that that's what it was. But I remember doing this DVD and it started with chanting. It didn't seem weird to me at all. And I loved it. And I said to my friend, this is a thing I reckon I could do every day. And it just felt so natural to me. You know, I didn't do it every day at that point, but it wasn't until a couple of years later and I was bushwalking with a friend and she's like, we should start doing yoga together. And I was like, yeah. And she's like, we should start doing Kundalini yoga. And I was like, Kundalini yoga? What is that? Like, I'd never even heard of it, but still it piqued my senses. And so I went home and I Googled it, and it just so happened that there was a teacher who was in Kuranda the next weekend doing a Kundalini yoga workshop. And so I booked in and off I went, and it just blew my mind. Like, I remember just feeling this energy pulsing in my hands like nothing I'd ever felt before. And I went up to the teacher after class and I was like, wow. And she's just like, yeah, yeah. And I was like, no, like, wow. And she was just like, Satnam, Satnam. And yeah, and so then that teacher was in Cairns for about 6 months or so. And so I went to every class that I could while she was here. And then at that point in time, there wasn't a lot of Kundalini online. There weren't any other teachers around. So I could try and do what I could do by myself. But it was sort of a slow beginning. She'd come back, I'd get right into it, and then eventually decided this is something I need to teach. This is something that I love.
How amazing. And so with Kundalini, how is it different to other forms of yoga?
It works a lot more with the energy, but it also works a lot deeper into the nervous system. And there is this very energetic and kind of mysterious aspect to Kundalini that we can't explain, or why it works and how it works in the way that it does in a lot of occasions. But it uses a lot of breath, it uses chanting, it uses posture in a different way to what other yogas use posture. And that might mean holding a particular posture for a longer period of time, or including a powerful breath with that posture, or even including chanting within that posture. And it works very deeply with our nervous system. So we are starting to have this beautiful merging of science now explain to us what's happening physiologically from some of these things that we do in Kundalini, which we haven't had, even 10 years ago. That wasn't in the realm of what we could understand and know of how Kundalini works. But it's also very energetic. And when I talk about energetic, I'm not talking about as in like fitness energetic. I mean as in working with the energy systems within our bodies, what some lineages would call nadis or meridians or chakras. Basically, these energy fields that run through us and around us that contain information and contain blocks or levels of openness. We can work with that to try and create more opening through our energetic body, as well as our physical body and our nervous system, which I think is quite unique to Kundalini. I've done lots of other types of yogas, and there is often some kind of energetic aspect to it, but nothing comes close to working with our energy system like Kundalini does. It's very much working on those subtle levels.
So if somebody was to go to a class, I mean, for myself, I think my first experience was that we sat for a lot of it. And I thought that was fabulous. We just literally sat in one position, but it was about the way we move the upper half of the body. And like you said, from a physiological aspect, that I remember afterwards, some people sort of saying that, their body was doing things that they got shocked that maybe that, if we go into the realms of our stomach and our intestines, because it's sort of moving through and giving you almost like a bit of a massage on the inside, isn't it?
And a big part of that is the practice of the bandhas, which are very dominant in Kundalini. There are a lot of yoga practices that use the bandhas, or which is a body lock, essentially, a contraction of different parts of the body to direct energy flow, which is working deeply into those internal organs as well. So in my classes, there's a lot of Mula Bandha, which is the root lock. So I will give the cues, squeeze your anus, sex organ, navel, in and up. Perhaps flare the ribs, tighten under the ribs, tighten the neck, drop the chin. These are the body locks, and they are used a lot generally after each posture that we do in Kundalini yoga, and that alone can move a lot of energy. So it doesn't have to be a jumping around, moving around a lot. We can use the breath and just these internal contractions to really move things.
It sounds like it's very good for your pelvic floor muscles. So, because you're holding all of that area. Do you find that because you are talking about sexual organs that people then kind of giggle or laugh, or if they haven't had that experience before, they're trying to hold in that experience? Because it's not something that we openly discuss, is it, usually in daily life? And certainly not what you expect from a yoga class.
I know, I've said like anus, sex organ, and navel so many times in my classes, like it's nothing to me now. But I remember when I first heard it, and I was like, really? And I remember pulling a friend along, and she giggled. And when I first started teaching, like saying to my friend, and I giggled saying it for the first time. I did a session recently for my colleagues at a work development day, staff development day, and like I did get a giggle or a smirk in that. But to me now it's second nature. But yeah, for sure, it's not something, even in I've been to other types of yoga where they say to engage Mula Bandha, but they don't use that cue. They may say lift the pelvic floor, or engage your lower abdominal muscles. But to me, that's a very different experience of having this wave of squeezing first your anus muscles, then squeezing your sexual organs, then pulling your navel in and up. It creates this upward wave, which is a different kind of lock to just contracting your pelvic floor or just contracting your lower abdominal muscles.
Is this where sometimes I think I've heard in the past that Kundalini energy is quite sexual? Is this where people kind of get that from?
I think that's probably a part of it, but also Kundalini yoga at its core is a tantric practice. And anytime tantric is mentioned, there is this kind of, association with it being a sexual practice. And also it can, when we start to work with our Kundalini, it can be kind of orgasmic pleasure in these waves of energy that run through us. Like I remember the first time I had a really visceral experience of that kind of energy, it felt like the build up to an orgasm, and I could kind of feel this like pleasure moving up my body from the base. And I was like, wow, this is a good
Wow.
meditation.
Everyone's signing up for Kundalini right now. Like, where's the class? But that energy can be quite scary, right? Because it can be misused as well. I know I've done an interview recently with a lady who wrote a book called The Ethical Psychic, and one of the things she said was when we are working with these energies, it can be misused, and sometimes even in different yoga spaces, when we have different gurus, whenever we're looking up to someone, sometimes these energies can be mismanaged if they're not, if you're not held in the right space.
I've had a lot of people who have heard me, say, oh, I'm a Kundalini yoga teacher, and come and tell me their stories about having these people spontaneously awaken their Kundalini. So often it was in India or Thailand, and there would be a guru or a teacher who would touch their spine and awaken this energy, and they had a lot of negative implications following that. When we talk about Kundalini energy and awakening our Kundalini in the type of Kundalini yoga that I teach, it's a very gentle process. And actually, the focus is more on preparing our nervous system and strengthening our nervous system and creating softer openings so that it can arise of its own accord. We're not forcing it open. We're creating openness in the body, and we're building a strength in our nervous system to be able to hold that openness. So I don't feel a danger in it. I certainly have never had anybody in any of my classes, come and tell me that they've had a negative experience in that regard. I think it's how people, how a teacher approaches it, how people approach it, but it's you can do Kundalini yoga and the goal doesn't have to be to awaken your Kundalini. And certainly when I teach my classes, that's never the intention that I set, is for our Kundalini to be awakened. I'm much more about opening our hearts or sinking into the moments of stillness that are offered as a result of really resetting our nervous system and really diving deep to impact our nervous system in particular ways. the process of Kundalini awakening, or the sensations of that, are just a byproduct that may or may not happen of its own accord.
And when you talk about the nervous system, are you talking about flight and fight response that we have and being able to calm that down so we're not in stress?
I'm referring to our autonomic nervous system and the movement between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And that is, when we look at the things that we do in Kundalini yoga, it's this kind of oscillation between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So a simple example, I did a breath practice at the beginning of a workshop I taught last weekend, and part of that breath is sticking your tongue out as far as you can and doing breath of fire through your mouth with your tongue sticking out. So when we do breath of fire, which is a rapid breath, pumping our diaphragm through an open mouth, it's a high oxygenating breath that's going to trigger to our brain more of a fight, flight, a sympathetic response. Because, if you think about when in life are we breathing rapidly through our mouth, it's if we're running or if we're in danger. But the act of sticking our tongue out and stretching this space underneath our tongue activates our vagus nerve and is triggering a parasympathetic response. So by doing these two things consecutively, we're kind of confusing our brain as to which system it should be activating. And what happens when we do that and then stop at the end is we create stillness. Our brain doesn't know what to do with this, so it forces it into the present moment, and we can go into really deep meditative states of stillness directly after, and sometimes even during the posture. So it's this real reset of our nervous system that occurs, particularly when you follow active things, active breath, active postures with moments of stillness, which is how, if you've ever come to my class, that's how I love to teach. And that's because we want to have that. Even the act of mula ban, like, even doing a simple spiniflex, inhaling, exhaling, squeezing mula ban. So that's like a sympathetic state. You squeeze everything, holding the breath. That takes us to a sympathetic state, a peak sympathetic state. And then when we soften, we exhale, and we be very still, we flick straight back into parasympathetic. And there's this real bliss in this stillness that can occur there. Almost like, for me, could take me 20 minutes of still meditation to get to that point that I can arrive at just by doing like a 2-minute or 3-minute practice.
I love that thought of there's the bliss in the stillness, because we are so busy running around doing so many things throughout our day. And even if we do stop for a minute to take a breath, our minds can often continue racing. So to be able to, like you said, almost trick your body into that state in relatively short amount of time, because sometimes these practices can take years and years in to try and feel that. So this sounds like almost like a bit of a cheeky shortcut. I love a cheeky shortcut.
Yeah. Who doesn't want a cheeky shortcut?
Yeah. And so tell me a little bit about, you also spoke about this heart opening space. And because when we talk about all those energy centers, that like you said, the goal is not necessarily to awaken the Kundalini energy. It can also be very heart-centered. And I know that you are very big on self-love and really coming back to yourself.
Every teacher that you come across is going to have their own focal points and their own style, and the heart opening space is, that this is one of my passions, and this is not so much necessarily just a teaching of Kundalini yoga or something. This is something that I work deeply with to try and cultivate in my own life, and to have an open heart in the world, I think is such a beautiful gift to ourselves and to other people. And if I can, share my own heart and in some way provide a space where others can open their hearts, then that's incredible for me. Lots of things that we can do to open our hearts. Sometimes simply being in stillness with focusing there at our heart center is going to create an opening. Often we can go through a lot of life without taking the time to really connect to our heart and to feel our heart and to feel what's in our heart. And then there are other things we can do if there is a block, or if there are some walls that have come up, to kind of coax it open a little bit more. So some of the movements, simply twisting from side to side with a breath, and it doesn't even have to be fast, but that movement with our breath, with some intention, can create an opening. A simple spinal flex, lifting up and arching back, that can create an opening, both front and back. These kind of movements that we don't always do in life can create an opening. But I also, when I'm teaching Kundalini, I'm also working a lot with intention. So bringing that intention to the posture, to the movement, I think, or I certainly feel for my own practice, and when I teach, it creates a deeper opportunity for us to have that kind of effect from what we're doing.
For people that maybe haven't had the experience of having some of these energy centers opened, I know for myself, I definitely had a spontaneous heart opening at one time, and it was equally as painful as it was beautiful. Do people, I mean, if somebody's maybe a little bit frightened, if they have sort of shut down this part of themselves due to hurt or pain, can you tell me some of the experiences that people have had in terms of that feeling, that opening of their heart?
Generally, the most natural way it presents in class is through tears, and it's actually more rare for me to teach a class and have nobody cry than to have a class where there are tears. And it's not tears necessarily accompanied by a feeling of sadness. It's more a physiological response to this opening of our hearts. And tears are very, very common. But you're right. And as you probably know, and as certainly has been my experience, when we open our heart, we're also opening to the pain. It's not just to the love. And so the pain can be more intense. And I've had many people over the years say to me, I felt the tears about to come, and I stopped it. And I say, well, why? Like, why did you stop it? There's no, you're allowed to cry here. And a really common response I get is, because if I start, I'm afraid I won't stop. And we have, I think, when we're still with ourselves, we have this, and we start to get to that point, there's a sense of the depth of it. We can kind of feel, whoa, there's something powerful here, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to handle it. And so there can be that natural fear. And that's why it's so beautiful to practice in a group with a teacher who's going to hold the space for you, and with students who, other people who are there are going through the same process, doing the same thing, also in that space with you.
That's beautiful. Wow, so true what you said about that we're not just opening to the love, we're opening to the pain. And that's, I mean, even that made me want to cry. You probably saw me, I started to get a bit teary, but it's so true, because when do we take the time to be able to allow ourselves to feel it all, not just the good stuff, but the not so nice stuff too.
And in some of my deepest moments of grief, of losing family members, and in deep moments of loss, is when my heart has felt most open. And one of my teachers, I remember going to this workshop with this amazing teacher, Guru Mayor, who works pretty much solely with emotions and with Kundalini yoga as a tool for working with our emotions and being in that communication with our emotions. And he went around the room and, said to everyone, what's your dominant? He has like 7 negative emotions. What's your dominant negative emotion? And there was some bloke there who said depression. And Guru Mayor got this big smile on his face, and he's like, if that's your dominant emotion, you're an open-hearted man. And you can't be depressed and closed-hearted at the same time. It actually cannot exist. And when I think about that in terms of grief, you can't be in an experience of grief and have your heart closed. You can't. Like, they can't not exist together. it's such an opening as much as love.
Just thinking about that, when we have experienced those really deep emotions, it is it's that openness to feel.
And sometimes it's so painful and you just want to close it back up, but that's the way it goes. The deeper the capacity for pain, the deeper the capacity for love.
That is so beautiful. Wow. Oh my gosh. This we went deep there, didn't we?
Yeah.
Oh gosh. So when you do a class and you've made this space where everybody's walking out open-hearted, full of love, and feel so light, and then something happens and it just feels like it shuts it all down. So how do we remain open after one of these, a class that has made space for that heart opening?
I think that's the ongoing journey of life. Like, I don't think one Kundalini yoga class is, a quick fix for a heart opening. But I remember sitting on a 10-day silent retreat, and that for me was also a very heart opening experience, because it wasn't Kundalini yoga, but we were meditating for 8 hours a day at our heart center. And my heart felt so open, to the point where the beautiful teacher would say at the start of every meditation, close your eyes and bring your awareness into your heart space. And it was like I was my heart space. I didn't even need to focus at the center of my chest anymore. It's just like all I was heart. And then leaving that and going back to work the next day and having people like be grumpy at the photo guys, run out of photocopiers, run out of paper, and me trying to help someone who was getting very grumpy because I was stressed, and me trying to say to myself, stay in your heart, stay in your heart, stay in your heart. It's really hard. And I think this is my personal opinion, and I'm not saying I'm right or wrong, but I think the answer to how to live your life like that is to have really strong boundaries. And I remember after that experience watching on Netflix the documentary with Gurumul. Oh, you met him.
Yes, yes.
And listening to him sing, to me, that's like, wow, that is open heartedness. Like, that is pure heart. And then to see how tight his boundaries were, like, he wouldn't talk to TV hosts. If he didn't want to talk, he simply wouldn't talk. He would, that was ultimate boundaries. I was like, that's part of what you need to live a really open-hearted life, is to have really strong boundaries. And sometimes, it's not easy, it's tricky. And how do we manage that in a workplace? And I'm still trying to figure that out myself, but it's just an ongoing journey of how do we live in an open-hearted way.
It is amazing, that journey to become more open-hearted. And I found that through being open-hearted, we tend to be able to find the things that light us up and bring us joy, and even sometimes become more creative. I would love to talk to you about part of your creative journey and more about that divine feminine energy. Would you be happy to come back for a part two?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Beautiful talking to you.
As we end today's episode of the Divine Style podcast, I extend my deepest gratitude for your presence and openness on this journey of self-love, self-discovery, and spiritual growth. Farewell for now, and may your journey inward bring you the self-love you seek.